Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, so thankful to have you joining us for our Elevating LGBTQ Women webinar. This is part of our Breaking Barriers webinar series. At She Should Run, we have a mission of dramatically increasing the number of women running for public office. And to do that, we recognize that women face barriers and challenges, so we provide education and resources to overcome those. With our Breaking Barriers webinar series, we also recognize that some women face extra barriers of prejudice or discrimination because of different ways that they identify, different races and ethnicity, different ability. And so we want to make sure that we create space to talk about these more specific barriers and then also provide space for you to ask questions and to create relationships and networking with one another. So today is part one of our two-part for Elevating LGBTQ Women, and we're so excited to be able to hear today from Annise Parker, and I will do an introduction of her in just a moment. One thing that we do want to orient you to as you're here in the Zoom room, so as I've mentioned so far, if you want to chat with us throughout the webinar, do make sure that it says to all panelists and attendees in the to line. Later, after Annise's remarks, we will go ahead and have a live Q&A. So you'll want to make sure you look at the bottom of your Zoom bar to the Q&A section. That's where you can submit your questions, and I'll make sure that we evaluate those and make sure that we can have Annise answer some of those for us. Because she is the highlight of today, I'll just go ahead and introduce Annise, and then we'll move forward to her remarks. Annise is the president and CEO of the LGBTQ Victory Fund and Victory Institute. She is also the first she's also formally elected official to lead these, I'm messing up. Let me start again so that everyone knows what's happening. So Annise Parker is the president and CEO of the LGBTQ Victory Fund and Victory Institute. She is the first formally elected official to lead these organizations, and she had 6 years as the Houston City Council member, 6 years as a city controller, and 6 years as mayor of the city. She is one of only 2 women to have been elected mayor and is the only person in Houston history to have held the offices of council member, controller, and mayor. And she was the first openly LGBTQ mayor of a major American city. Annise, so sorry for getting tongue-tied in the beginning, but we're so excited to have you here with us. And without further ado, I will give it to you.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be on the call and to be speaking at least virtually to everybody who's listening. Yes, I was in office in Houston for 18 years, and I have personally been on the ballot 11 times. I know a lot about campaigning. I know a lot about running for office, and I actually know a lot about local government, and I'll just say that my bias is that I think local government is the highest form of government because it's the most immediate and it has the most direct impact on people's lives. I was the first openly LGBT mayor of any major American city, but Houston is America's 4th largest city, and I was only the 10th woman in American history to lead a top 10 US city. And just a random factoid, there have been 12 now, and 6 of us were Texas mayors, 2 in Houston, 2 in Dallas, and 2 in San Antonio. Some very supposedly liberal places like Los Angeles and New York have never had a woman mayor. The current highest ranking woman mayor in America is Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, the 3rd largest city in the United States. Actually, Lori's an amazing woman and a really wonderful mayor. She took both my titles, top lesbian mayor and top woman mayor in American history. What I'm doing now is that I run the LGBTQ Victory Fund and Victory Institute, and I want to talk a little bit about what they do and then weave that back into my own story. Victory Fund and Victory Institute are almost 30 years old. In fact, we'll be 30 next year. And we are essentially the love child of Emily's List. For those of you who are familiar with Emily's List, which supports pro-choice Democratic women, a lot of the founders of Emily's List helped launch Victory Fund, with the idea that there needed to be an organization that focused exclusively on LGBTQ candidates. Victory Fund is a PAC, and it endorses LGBTQ candidates at every level and in every state. Victory Institute is our C3 side, and we do candidate training. We actually do international work. We have an array of programs that we might get into, and I'll encourage you to visit victoryfund.org or victoryinstitute.org. As we sit here today, there are approximately 850 openly LGBT elected officials serving somewhere across the United States. They said we're the only national organization that only works with LGBTQ candidates. We don't do policy, we don't do lobbying, we only focus on individuals. And we're the only national organization that works at every level of the ballot. But we are nonpartisan, and we have only two real standards. One is that you have to be, well, openly LGBT, you have to be fully trans supportive, and you have to be pro-choice. Then we put a viability filter on top of that, and that's how we winnow it down to the 300 or so that we'll work with this year, which is a record number for us. When I first started running, Victory Fund did actually exist. My first race was in 1991. It's a long time ago. And those, when I say I was in office for 18 years and 11 races, I started out by losing twice. And I want to focus on a little bit about losing before I talk about the 9 consecutive citywide races that I won. Victory Fund was around, but there were very few candidates back then, and wasn't as strong an organization as it is today. But why those the losses were important? There's a lot of data out there that for women to run for office, we have to be asked. We have to almost be courted. We have to be often persuaded. We have to be asked multiple times. I am the stereotype. The first race I ran was a city council race in Houston. I was recruited. I was the most visible lesbian activist in Houston at the time. The race was 1991. I was recruited as part of a redistricting effort to represent the LGBTQ community. And I wasn't ready. I was miserable. I hated campaigning. I ran against a, excuse me, something flying in here. I ran against a nice, moderate Democratic ally because that was the race that was available. And I absolutely got shellacked. Crawled into a fetal position after losing that race and said, I hated campaigning. This is not what I want to do. Never had any desire to run for office. I'm just going to stop. So 4 years pass and a special election comes up. We actually elected a woman to Congress who's currently still serving. And it's 1995 special election. It's January, and it's a 6-week campaign. And I said, you know, I can stand anything for 6 weeks. You can stand a toothache for 6 weeks. This is something I want to do this time. I'm going to jump in. What I didn't realize was, or didn't think about, is that a January special election, no one knows you're running. No one knows there's a campaign. There were 19 candidates running for this one position. There was not a single candidate forum that we went to over the holidays where there were more real people than there were candidates. I finished third in that race, and I learned a lot of things. One, the 2 people who finished ahead of me, one had been elected countywide as a Republican, and the other one had been elected countywide as a Democrat. This is a nonpartisan race that they were both running in for city council. And I knew absolutely that I knew more about the city, that I had a better resume to present, but what they had was name ID and better campaigns. And that if this is something that I really wanted, I needed to know how to run a campaign, and I needed to upgrade my skill set to better prepare myself to do that. So the third time I ran, and ran successfully, it was 1997, ran for a city council seat at large in Houston. But I had to do several things to prepare for that campaign. One, and here's where I go into my history. I'm a native Houstonian. I'm a graduate of Rice University in Houston. And I did, when I got out of and I was a lesbian activist in college, a very visible lesbian activist, helped found my university student group back in 1979. I'm 64 years old, so get that out there. There's a Wikipedia page, so no secrets. But as that was part of who I was, but I worked in the oil industry. And when I graduated from college, oil and gas was 80% of the Houston economy. And so that's what one did. And I spent 20 years working in the oil industry before I was elected to public office. And I worked for a conservative Republican oil man in a conservative, very conservative industry that was very important to my town. Those first two campaigns, every time I saw my name in print, it was Annise Parker, lesbian activist, running for city council. Or Annise Parker, lesbian activist, says this in her city council campaign. So I knew that when I ran again, it had to be my choice. I had to be ready, but I couldn't be Annise Parker lesbian. Or actually, I say Annise Parker lesbian. Back then it was Annise Parker gay. They actually didn't use the L word very often. So it was Annise Parker gay. And I also had to have the resources to run. So I realized that I had to raise money, and I had to learn how to do it. And I did it successfully. I won't say I ever like it, but I had to learn how to do it. And the third thing I had to do is that I had to upgrade my campaign staff. I couldn't do the friends and family volunteer staff. So I hired a campaign manager, and we actually ran and successfully those 9 races. We did them all together. I had the same team almost entirely for all those 9 races. I learned how to make the cold calls to raise money. But on the image issue, I had to do something very different. What I did was, this is in 1997, there were 2 newspapers in town and 3 TV stations. They're a little different today. But I made a portfolio of every bit of coverage from my races. And I met with the editorial staff of the 2 newspapers and the TV stations, and I laid it out. And I said, look at how I'm described in your news article, or in this, in my little video cassette of the news coverage. I'm Annise Parker gay. I work for Republican oil man Robert Mossbacker. I'm an engineering technologist. I do IT work. You talk about my opponents by what they do for a living. When you talk about me, you talk about what I do as a volunteer. Yes, I'm gay. That's not what I do, and that's not who I am. And if you're going to talk about what those other folks do as volunteers, I'm perfectly comfortable about that. But you talk about what they do for a living, you need to be fair. And I just kept having those conversations, and I advocated for myself, which is always an important lesson for women. Third time I ran, the coverage changed. I won't say that I was that persuasive. I think I called it attention to it, but I think the world was changing as well. So upping my campaign skills, putting a fundraising plan together and executing it, and then advocating for myself so that people wouldn't get hung up on Annise Parker gay or Annise Parker lesbian, but I'd have an opportunity to express what my policies were, what my plans were for the city. And it was successful. I know we want to get to questions, but I like to start with that because here's a sad secret. Most women who lose a race stop. They just stop. That woman that in that special election who's in Congress today, she lost, I think, her first 4 races before she became a city council member and then a member of Congress, and she's been there, how many years later? I have a friend of mine who was currently in Congress today, Sylvia Garcia, lost her first 3 races, didn't give up, kept her eye on the ball, became a city controller before I did, and is in Congress today. If it is what you want, don't give up. But you have to do what you need to do in order to prepare yourself to run. I think that's a good place to stop, because I can keep talking. Let's talk shop, but let's answer some questions.
Realized that I was on mute. Yep. We'll get right into questions. I just want to start though by saying thank you so much for being so candid about your story. I feel like I had the benefit of reading so many of your questions, those of you who registered for the event, and so many people asked about that, about I am in a primarily conservative area. How do I move forward and talk about the issues and talk about the ideas I have for this community that I'm serving, and allow people to see me as a potential candidate instead of just as my identity or as my sexuality. And so you talked about that a bit with going and talking to the editorial staff. I'm just, before we move on, one, wanted to thank you for that, and two, just wanted to see if there's anything else you would add about being in a primarily conservative area and how to work with people who may have differing views than your own, and how to bring them together to work with you.
So first, let me say it's important that I actually had a resume and a record. I'd actually been in the workforce for 20 years when I finally won my race in 1997, and I had a very robust career as a volunteer. Actually, it was completely another story, but in that conservative industry, I was, when I say one of the most, if not the most, one of the most visible lesbian activists in Houston in the 80s. I was president of our political caucus. I was president of Lesbian Gay Democrats of Texas, Lesbian Gay Rights Lobby of Texas, yada, yada, yada. But when I was at work, I put my business suit on and I did not talk about it. I was on, I might be on TV advocating as the president of the Houston Gay Political Caucus, but I didn't talk about it at work. And I tried to bifurcate my life, and that never works. But when I decided to run and began to run, I had a long track record of being a community volunteer. And for the first 10 years after I graduated from college, I was Miss Gay or lesbian, everything. And then for the next 10 years, I was president of the largest civic association in Houston. I was a United Way volunteer in senior services. I ate lunch at every senior center in Houston. I worked on housing issues. So that by the time I ran, I wasn't running. I had to get the media to stop referring to me as Annise Parker Gay, but because that was how I was being introduced to people who didn't know me. But I had a record of service. And so what I was doing when I began to run that third time was offering folks my resume and my record of service. And I probably should have said this: I didn't ask for enough help the first time or the second time I ran. That third time, the other thing that I did was, those 20 years, I was actively volunteering for other people's campaigns. And this time, I looked at all of them, I contacted all of them and said, I need your help now. And I had all but 2 minority elected officials in the region and I know exactly which 2, who supported me. And I had a really impressive list of validators, plus my campaign, it was gay money and little blue-haired ladies, because I'd worked with them in the senior centers and in the civic associations. So getting to the question itself, nobody cares that you want to run for office. No one is interested in the fact that you want to run for office. The office is not a destination. A political office is a tool. They want to know what you're going to do with the tool. And one of the ways they determine, whether they trust you with that tool in your hand is, where have you been and what have you done? I can't tell you how many times over the years, and certainly in the job that I do now, that I've talked to folks who come up to me and say, I'm going to run for office someday. And the answer is no one cares. What do you want to do? And when you decide what you want to do, then you decide which office is most appropriate to accomplish that. And then it's your job to show the folks who will be voting for you that you have what it takes. If there are single issue voters out there, they're few and far between, however. Most voters, they may care deeply about a handful of issues. I mean, single issue voters, yes, there are pro-choice or anti-choice voters out there, and that is a deal killer for them. And there are a few other issues as well. I know there are folks out there who would never have voted for me because I was openly LGBT, but they're very few. Most people want to see the whole package, and there's an interesting thing that we've discovered, and that Victory's been testing this out for a long time, but I've seen it myself, that because our candidates lead with, I guess, integrity, they offer who they are, that folks who disapprove, folks in, from conservative religious backgrounds or in conservative places say, if you're going to be honest with me about your sexual orientation, which I do not approve of, I bet you'll probably be honest with me about other things too. And today, what I want more than anything is someone who'll just tell me the truth. And that's an important place to be. What we teach in our candidate and campaign trainings, we do, lots of organizations do candidate campaign trainings. And probably you could go to, as I said, we're bipartisan. We support LGBTQ candidates all along the scale, although almost all of our candidates are Democrats, frankly. But you could go to far right Tea Party candidate campaign training, and probably 90% of what you would learn about campaigning would be the same. That the difference, whether it's an Emily's List training or a Victory Fund training or a Tea Party training, is what is tailored to your particular message. And for us, often the most important thing is teaching LGBTQ candidates how to put their own narrative together. Back to that 97 campaign that I won, when I finally got past the, Annise Parker gay activist, I got to talk about myself, reintroduce myself in a different way. But every piece of literature I did in that campaign had both past president, Houston Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus on it. So I was sending a signal to my community that I wasn't going back in the closet. Like, how could I? But that I wasn't ashamed of it. But at the same time, it's, I was my employer, Robert Mossbacher Energy Company, and that I was also the police liaison for the LGBTQ community. One of my first endorsements was from the police union. So I had and then as I said, I put all the local elected official validators. And so what I was doing was throwing multiple data points out there so people could have a more holistic view and not get hung up on one. It's kind of a long way of answering the question, but it all comes together. You're not, well, if you are, and some people do this, if you are the lesbian candidate or the bisexual candidate for office and that's all you are, you're just running to make a point. People want to know what your plans are, and they want to know where you've been so they can get an idea of where you're going to go in that position.
Absolutely. And I love that you hit on so many of these points. Exactly like you said, is this going to be part of a Victory Fund or Victory Institute training, a She Should Run training, a Tea Party training, that we come down to this, how will you share your message? And exactly what you said before, getting involved in your community and getting involved, understanding what office you would want to run for and the changes you would like to make, and leading with that passion and also that history of work work in the spaces that you care about. I think that those serve as such strong proof points and allow people to see you for what you can accomplish and what you will do for them versus just a blanket identity or a photo or whatever else might be immediately accessible. And I really enjoy hearing about how you accomplish that. You had kind of mentioned this next piece about how in your organization, you're bipartisan, you work with LGBTQ candidates across the political spectrum. Since today's conversation is a bit about barriers that LGBTQ women might face in deciding to run for office, this was one of the questions that we received from one of our registrants that I felt like might highlight some of these pieces. This question was, why don't LGBTQ candidates feel welcome running as Republicans or Libertarians when only a small fraction of Republicans are socially conservative? There are many socially liberal Republicans and Libertarians that are fiscally conservative. Why does this barrier, and then me adding to this person's question, why do these barriers exist? And is there anything that you've observed in your position?
Because the people who show up in primaries and the people who show up at party caucuses are the people on the far fringe. And that is actually generally true for the Democrats as well. Pete Buttigieg, who we endorsed for president this year as the first viable Democratic candidate for a president who was LGBT, was not the first presidential candidate. The first known gay candidate for president was Fred Karger. You can look him up, Karger, who ran 8 years ago in Obama's reelection campaign as a Republican. He literally had the doors to state conventions barred to him. And he was prevented from taking the stage in a number of places because a lot of state parties have anti-LGBTQ planks in their party platforms. I would view Fred as more of an insurgent candidate because he delighted in pushing against that barrier, and there's a lot of little theatrical in that. And where Pete was clearly in the mainstream of the party. Now, some of that is the differences in where the parties are on our issue, and some of it is differences in those two candidates, but the world is changing as well. We do work with and support Republican candidates, but I will give you an interesting fact. We maintain something called the Out for America map, and if you do an internet search, Out for America, all those 850 some odd elected officials, they're on that map. And you can look and see in your state or your community who's openly LGBT. And you'll find that we get elected anywhere and everywhere we choose to run when we're good candidates and we reflect our constituents. But there are more openly transgender elected officials in the United States today than there are Republican elected officials. And almost every Republican elected official who's openly LGBT serves at the local level in a nonpartisan position. And that is just a fact. We'd like to change that, but until candidates run and win and can successfully navigate their party primaries, which is the challenge, they can win in November, but they have to make it through their primaries. We're happy to help them do that. We do the training, but it's still a challenge.
Yeah, and I appreciate your honesty on the challenges that exist. For those who want to see the Out for America report, the link is in the chat to the link there, so you can check it out. I'm going to keep going through questions that some of you submitted in the registration process. I see some of you filling up the Q&A chat. We'll be heading there soon, so if you have questions live, feel free to set them in there. This next
and if we can't get to the questions all today, we've talked about this, they'll forward them to me, and I'm happy to try to get them answered for you.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Annise, as well. So this next question came about, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties today, apologies. So this person said, I am considered a professional queer, someone in my community as a queer org leader. Should my brand be different or diluted when I run for office? And I know this is something that you talked about in your beginning remarks. You obviously have personal experience with this, and wanted to see how you might answer that.
So, yeah, I was in a lot of ways, I was the professional queer, the professional gay when I first ran. And interestingly, the second openly gay elected official in Houston, so a council member by the name of Sue Lovell, she was arguably the other most famous lesbian activist, and we were sort of frenemies over the years in Houston. And that visible public gay activist, it does not have to be an impediment. But again, if you're viewed as only caring about or only being an advocate for the LGBT community, that's where the problems come. People want to know what you're going to do for them, what your plan is for your district. So it has to be managed. And we were both successful, I think, because we had the broader suite of experiences, and we could demonstrate, and in a very similar way to what I did when Sue was elected. She showed the many years of work in other communities and with other elected officials that came around her. My wife likes to say, we've been together, actually, in January, it'll be 30 years. She likes to say we're not we're not just out of the closet, we're out on the front lawn, and we have been pretty much the whole time.
Yeah. And I think that, like, embracing that is your life, right? And everyone else is allowed to have their lives. And I think that makes a lot of sense. This is one of the questions we got live. So if you said earlier that you really need to know city politics, and this person asked, what advice would you give to a first-time mayoral candidate in a small city of just 13,000?
So did I say you really need to learn to know local politics? People vote not so much for someone who they understand, but for someone they believe understands their lives and can relate to their lives. So what your job is to introduce yourself in a way that shows that you understand the daily challenges of the people that you're seeking to represent. You have a plan to address those challenges, and that you're committed for the long haul. Now, part of the way you do that is show what you've already done and the experience that you bring in. As you know, there are 2.2 million Houstonians. As mayor of Houston, I've represented more people than the governors of 15 states. Didn't do a lot of the traditional knock on doors, retail politics. I talk about learning how to raise money. I raised more than $4 million 3 times in 6 years because we had 2-year terms. Last thing I did going out the door was give my successor a 4-year term. So we changed the city's charter. He hasn't thanked me nearly enough for that, I'm going to say. But what we preach at Victory, and until the pandemic, it was the gold standard, is that most races can be won on front doors, having conversations. We can have a separate conversation about how you campaign in the age of pandemic, but in a city of 13,000 people, that is what I would suggest, again, under normal circumstances, is that's about one-on-one, knocking on doors, having conversations, showing up at civic clubs, being visible, talking about what you have already done, not what you plan to do. Talk about what you've already done and how that relates to what you're doing or going to do in the future. And you can win that way. Local politics, every uh, every community has people who want to be power brokers or kingmakers. Every community has certain unwritten rules about who you need to go talk to or where you need to show up, and that's important to learn. You can hurdle all of that if you do enough of the hard work of going directly to the voters. So there's no one way to get there.
Yeah, awesome. We talk about that all the time, and about how putting yourself out there and talking to people is a huge way that you can propel yourself forward in those races. Another question we got from you people here today, thank you for submitting these questions, is what do you do if you want to run, but you're not being courted to run? No one's actively asking you or inviting you. How do you break ice and move forward in that space?
Well, when I said you shouldn't wait, you shouldn't be asked. The first time I was, and that is the stereotype of how a lot of women candidates get in. You wait to be asked, and you have to be asked multiple times. The second and the third time I ran, it was because I decided to raise my hand. I didn't grow up wanting to be in office. I never dreamed about being in politics. I was involved in politics because I cared about the issues, and my parents, my grandparents were active supporters of candidates. They were religious about showing up to the polls. It was part of how I was raised. You pay attention to politics and you support the candidates that you care about. The idea of running for office myself was completely out of just insane. And by the way, I'm a lesbian activist. It will never work, until I was recruited, and it didn't work. And then I had to think about that. And was it something that I personally really wanted to do? And if it's something that you really want to do and you have prepared yourself and you're ready to do the work, whose permission are you waiting for?
I love that so much. And I would say that to all of you who are thinking about it, who are on the fence. Yes, own this. And I also love the way it fits in with your story, Annise, of how you were asked, you kind of go through this experience of rejection, of losing a race, and then coming back with your own self-motivated interests in running for office. And I think that when I work with so many women who have great ideas and great hopes for their communities, and I know are going to be able to affect change and just go after it, I echo her words 100%.
Okay, so let's talk about something else that I know
Yeah.
a lot of them are thinking out there. They're not gonna say, and that is, oh, I'm shy about public speaking and I don't want to put myself out there. Okay, I'm an introvert. I'm shy. I have extreme social anxiety. It is possible to conquer it. It is not fun. It is not easy. There are people, politics is a whole lot easier for extroverts, but introverts can be really successful, and even very, very shy people can be successful. Part of what made that first campaign a miserable experience was that I got recruited and I got talked into it, and I wasn't emotionally ready and I wasn't psychologically ready. And it was, I was just, it was killing me to get out there and run. And there are a lot of aspects of campaigning that I will never enjoy. Cold calling people. Put me up on a stage and challenge me. I'm the good student. Put me up on a stage and throw questions at me and let me debate. That's fine. But working a cocktail party or cold calling people, never going to be my strong suit. So I had to, even up until my 11th campaign. Every time I'd start the campaign and I'd start calling people and telling people I'd run, I'd have to write the whole script out. Everything I was going to say. And if they say this, I'm going to say that, even though I'd done it 1,000 times before. But every time I started, I had to start with that, because I had to I had to relearn how to do it, and I had to put myself in the headspace. And that is the other thing that a lot of people, they have this idea of what a candidate is. No, you're the candidate. You are who you are. but you have to be able to convey your message to the people who need to hear it. And so you have to do what it takes to get there. Now, some of that, and this, I know there's probably going to be another question about this, is about packaging. And we have a little time. I'm gonna tell a story on myself. So in 97, when I was running, and as I said, I hired a campaign team and had a lot of support. Basically, I called in the chits from every elected official that I worked with for 20 years. And I was like, I helped you. Please, I need you to help me this time. So I stood up, but I was still working. And when I said I worked for a Republican oil man, very conservative. He actually served as Commerce Secretary to Bush 41, very close to the Bush family. And I worked for them the whole time, all those races. I quit when I was elected office. I became a full-time public official. But one of the reasons I think that I was successful there, first, I was the only one. I was the IT department for Mosbacher, which is another. So I had a skill set that they valued. But Robert Mosbacher had an openly lesbian daughter. His daughter Dee Mosbacher is actually a noted documentarian out in California. But that he already had someone in his family he loved who had come out, and who I think would never have spoken to him again if he had in any way, discriminated against me on my job. But the sorry, train jumped the tracks there. That I had to take a leave of absence for part of the campaign, and this is another thing that people need to think about. Are you prepared for the time it takes to run? So I've been with the company for 18 years. I had a lot of, he and my boss allowed me to take my days off, and I had a month vacation, take days off in half day increments so I could go to candidate forums during the day, because, very inconvenient times. And I ended up taking the last 2 months of the campaign off, unpaid. It was the only way I could do it. But I remember one day I was on my way to work, and I was heading out the door, and the phone rings, and someone from the campaign team says, the Baptist ministers of Houston, speaking of conservative organizations, Baptist ministers, this is a Black pastors group, are screening today, and you need to go and screen with them. And I said, it's not on my calendar. I'm on my way to work. I need to go to work. And I was like, no, you have to go screen with them. This is the only opportunity you have. Well, why isn't it on my calendar? Well, they didn't invite you. Well, then why am I going? And my campaign guy said, they didn't invite you, but if you go, I guarantee you that they will screen you, and it's going to matter later that you showed up. And I whined and moaned for a while, and I'm not ashamed of this. Turned around, went in, took my had a pair of slacks on and a blazer, put on my most feminine dress, put the pantyhose on, up the makeup, went, signed in, sat on the front row with every other candidate. It was at a church, and waited, and like I belonged there. And lo and behold, they let me in, and we had a good conversation about the issues that I cared about. And a week later, I got a call that they had endorsed me, and I was doing a happy dance. There were 7 of us in that race, including a Black Baptist pastor who was one of their members, who they recognized was a non-viable candidate. And so what they actually said was, we're going to dual endorse you two. You are an amazingly impressive candidate. We know what you've done in the community. The fact that you took the time to come talk to us was important. We're going to endorse you. Story continues. I show up on endorsement day, and it's one of those endorsements, and it's not unusual, where they endorse you first, but then if you want to stay on their card, you have to pay money. And it was $1,000, which was a lot of money. in that campaign. And they told me to bring the check and told me where to show up. And I showed up, and I'm walking in, and two of the ministers came out and they met me at the door, and they said, "We have bad news for you." And actually, I was so excited for this endorsement, I had brought a photographer with me because I wanted some pictures of this, that we have changed our minds. And we just don't approve of your lifestyle. We don't think we can, we don't think we can put you on the ballot. We already have another candidate. We're just going to endorse the other candidate, not a dual endorsement. And in like the 15 seconds I had to make up my mind, I said, I really appreciate the fact that you thought this through and that you were willing to go with me. I understand and respect that you've changed your mind. I, appreciate the face-to-face conversation. I'm going to ask you to do something with me. I brought my check. I'm going to give you this check, and I'm going to trust you to hold this check, not deposit it. I don't think your candidate is going to make it into the runoff. I absolutely believe I will. But when the runoff comes, either way, you can spend this money. You can spend it by endorsing me, or if I'm not in the runoff, with whoever candidate you have. But will you hold this for me? Because this is my pledge that I'm going to come back. They took my check. They held it. And then I said, I'd like one more thing. Would you allow me to go in and thank every one of your members for initially agreeing to support me? And they did. And I went in and I plastered them. I don't know. It must have been a smile, but it wasn't real. But I went in and I thanked everybody, all the ministers. Had a big press conference going on. And then I actually stayed for the press conference. So as they all lined up with their candidates, and I wasn't, I'm in the back behind the reporters, just smiling and watching, being polite. They endorsed me in the runoff, and they endorsed me in most of my races after that.
I think you're a phenomenal storyteller. I hope people enjoyed my own facial expressions. I can see myself in the window as I was, but I'm so impressed by the courage of showing graciousness and kindness when you were personally affronted, not just your campaign, but who you are. And I think that I'm just so impressed by you, and thank you for sharing that story. And also thank you for acknowledging and just leaning into the personal strengths, right? You mentioned extroverts might have an easier time of this, and so find your strengths in the campaign. I think that you've highlighted so many of just the wonderful ways that women of different strengths, different interests, different communities can show up and run for office. We're nearing at the end of our time. This is one question that was shared that I was just so excited to ask you. And that is the question of people often talk about all the struggles and challenges of being queer and pursuing great goals. What is the most wonderful part of that? And what has that been for you, of being out and pursuing these offices, pursuing greatness for your community, for Houstonians, and what would you share with that?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I had a good career in industry for 20 years, and then I had an amazing career in public life as an elected official for 18 years. I was excited to go to work every day I was in public office. I had a good career, but there was never that joy. There was never that satisfaction. And even the worst day as mayor, and I had some really awful days, was more fulfilling than the best day in private industry. But the fact that I could go through all of that I could not have survived campaigning without the woman who's now my wife. And there's a work-life balance. There is no such thing as work-life balance when you're a candidate. You're a candidate all the time. And And in fact, there were no boundaries when I was mayor. Um, uh, it's a 24/7 job. So so the 30 years that we've been together, never once has she ever said, "Why do you spend so much time in those community meetings? Why aren't you home more?" And the only way to survive that is, for me, is that when I'm home, I am present. Now I might not be home till midnight, but when I'm home, I'm present. And I unplug the phone. I don't answer emails in the middle of the night. That there is home time, and there's the time that I have to give the public. Now that's partly being the introvert, and that's partly just trying to be sane. But the best part is to be able to bring my whole life together in one place. Because when I was in industry, remember I said I was activist by night, oil company employee by day. So I've like split myself. No, bring my whole self and bring the personnel I have most in the world with me through that journey. That's the best part.
Oh, that is incredible. I have been so inspired. All of you who attend today, thank you for being here. I know this has been such an incredible opportunity for us to hear from you. I know that there are questions that we did not get to. As Annise mentioned, we'll share some of these with her and try to get responses for you. For LGBTQ women on the line today, we have our part 2 of the series that will be happening next week at the same time, so July 15th, noon to 1 Eastern. This is a closed conversation just for LGBTQ women. We'll be coming back, talking through some of these questions with candor and vulnerability, and we'll also be inviting 2 She Should Run community members to talk about their experiences as well. So we look forward to being able to gather with all of you next week for that. Just want to end with, these are truly a labor of love for the She Should Run team. We are so excited to be able to engage with experts in the field like Annise Parker. We're excited to be able to provide these as great resources for you. We're so thankful to those of you who provided donations in the registration process. It's the only way that these things are possible. If you've been inspired today and want to keep seeing more webinars like this, consider donating to She Should Run so that you can contribute to what makes this magic happen. Also, Annise mentioned several times, be sure to check out the Victory Institute and Victory Fund. There are great opportunities to get involved, to be part of trainings, and to support LGBTQ candidates. Also, if you want a starting place for how to run for office or questions about running for office, She Should Run exists as a place to explore that opportunity. Our community is full of women who are taking those first steps towards their political journeys. So thank you for dedicating the time to be here today. Thank you again, Annise. I'll just give a short applause. I'm just one person with their mic on, but I've been so grateful to have you here today. I don't know if you can see the chat, but you have thank yous coming from all across the US and Greece for the woman who is joining us from Greece. So thank you again for being here. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you all later.